Is the spectacular Spider-Man as great as we remember? Today I'm going to go through Season 2 and find out. Of course, that means I've already gone through Season 1, so you can find a link to that video in the description if you missed it. But before we get to the review, it's time for this video's sponsorship, Wondershare Filmora, an easy-to-use video editor. With its slick built-in transitions, filters, and split-screen effects, editing is simple and quick. It's honestly impressive how fast you can set up some of these things and make videos look great. Plus, there are some nice little holiday effects, and these types of things are always just fun to fiddle around with. Now, you can do all these things and more in the free version of the software. With the free version, your video will just export with a watermark on it, but this means you can test drive this baby for yourself without spending a single cent. This is what we call a really frickin' good deal. Speaking of really frickin' good deals, you can comment down below with hashtag #CreateWithFilmora for a chance to win free licenses. So yeah, click the link in the description, download the free version if you're interested, and get creating. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoy the video. Season 2 of The Spectacular Spider-Man picks up right where the previous season left off. Peter got a smooch from Gwen, and he just finished taking care of Venom. So now Peter has to battle his two greatest enemies, trauma and puberty. See, Peter's on the hunt for Eddie Brock, who's gone missing following their fight. Though Peter can't find him, he is having nightmares about him and sometimes even seeing him in places he doesn't seem to be. In the previous season, there were moments where I wanted a bit more introspection from Peter, more time to see the effects some of these fights have on him emotionally, and this is exactly the sort of thing I was hoping for. Other than that, well, Mysterio is here and Spider-Man's gotta fight him. For the most part, Mysterio is simply a fun, goofy villain. I love this part where Mysterio reveals his identity and it's the guy from the boat during the chameleon conflict, another example of callbacks leading to a cohesive world. Plus, having such a grandiose villain be some nobody is a solid punchline. I also love how Spider-Man deals with Mysterio's illusions, opting to cover his eyes and trust his spidey senses. All at once, it highlights his intelligence and level-headedness, as well as a facet of his abilities that have received comparatively little focus outside of helping him dodge attacks from behind. So seeing its utility here serves as a satisfying expansion of Spider-Man's repertoire of super skills. In tandem with this, we have all of Peter's personal issues, the main one being his troubles with the ladies. Overall, Peter's not sure how to feel about Gwen, and to be honest, he doesn't make much progress this episode. Of course, this means that Peter is having quite a bit of trouble understanding his own feelings. So the episode is exploring this idea that villains' illusions are easier to see through than the illusions in his personal life. The next episode continues to focus on Peter's relationship difficulties. Mainly, it's becoming even clearer that Peter is going to need to choose between Gwen and Liz. Now, at the start, Liz was part of the bully Peter parade, but she's slowly become more likable and endearing. At this point, she's a pretty well-rounded side character who feels like a legitimate option Peter might choose. However, it's still clear that Gwen is closer to Peter in some ways. In particular, when Flash is in for surgery, Liz is upset and calls Peter, saying that she wants him there for support. He shows up as quickly as he can, but oh Nelly, he's got quite the nasty looking eye there, and Liz doesn't so much as mention it. But if this were Gwen, I think she'd definitely say something. That's not to condemn Liz or anything like that though. After all, Liz isn't in the best state right now and she barely has any time to talk with Peter before Flash comes out of surgery. Instead, to me, this serves as a subtle way to move the audience in Gwen's direction without making Liz seem like an unreasonable jerk. At the same time as this stuff though, Kraven has come to New York to hunt Spider-Man. Like Mysterio before him, Kraven is a fun villain. He also serves as a very concrete example of Spider-Man's existence bringing more powerful villains to New York. Of course, Rhino and Sandman did that too, but Kraven expands on that idea by being separate from Norman Osborn and Tombstone's goons. Overall, this episode doesn't have a ton going on, but it's once again doing a good job of following up on previous conflicts, building up the world, and delving into Peter's relationships. Following this, episode 16 continues with the will they won't they stuff. Then there's more superpowered battles in the form of the Master Planner's new Sinister Six. However, it does spend some time building up its minor characters. In particular, Mary Jane is actually getting something to do. She's gonna be the resident romantic advice girl, which is fine. At this point, I'm honestly just happy to have her do something, and it works well since it gives Gwen someone to bounce off of while she deals with her feelings. Other than that, not all that much stood out to me about this episode. However, in episode 17, things start heating up, because we finally learn who the Master Planner is. Doc Ock, who was previously pretending to be a frightened little man to trick his therapist, but is really trying to tap into all the computers in the world. In order to gain access to all the materials he needs, he kidnaps Gwen and manipulates her father into helping him. Once again, Gwen being kidnapped is used as a way to bring Peter's and Spider-Man's lives together. Oddly enough though, she isn't used only as a weakness for him. Instead, we see how Gwen's existence makes Spider-Man even more heroic. After all, when he's almost ready to give up, he looks at her and gets an adrenaline boost he needs to carry on. Later, when he's injured and they're trying to get out of here quickly, Gwen reminds him to rescue Electro. She then pilots the escape pod while Spider-Man is basically knocked out, helping save all their lives. This way, Gwen manages to be more than a typical damsel in distress by continually bringing out the best side of Spider-Man and even playing an instrumental part in their escape. There's a very real sense that she'll be there for him, to help him in his endeavors, and it makes it even easier to get behind their relationship. Meanwhile, George's concern for his daughter continues to fill out her life, building her up as a real and complete character. She isn't some prop for Peter or Spider-Man. She's a person with a lot going on, with her own skills and interests, with the ability to stay level-headed in extreme situations, and with family who cares for her. Considering Gwen's at the center of this season's Peter Parker conflict, this is all great. However, while I enjoyed certain segments of this arc and had some fun, I also had some issues with it. Mainly, it felt kinda anticlimactic and like it really didn't go anywhere all that interesting. I just thought this new Sinister Six and Master Planner stuff would amount to something more. All in all, this conflict just didn't feel like it got thoroughly explored on the Spider-Man side of things. Once again, lengthy fight scenes are taking center stage, as opposed to character-driven conflicts that show us more about Peter and the villains he's facing. But for now, it's time to move on, because it's Venom time, baby, and I absolutely adore the way the show brings him back. At this point, the Spectacular Spider-Man introduces new framing devices for some of its episodes. In this case, there's a video from Flash's birthday party, where a bunch of characters talk to a camera. As the episode moves along, it cuts to these videos, giving the sense that something is going to happen with them later. Peter's line is particularly interesting to me. "Sure," he says, "we've known each other since we were kids. We were best friends or something. I guess people change." Of course, he's talking about Flash here, but this can also be applied to Eddie, and I think that was done on purpose, to get the audience thinking about Eddie a bit more. After all, Peter later thinks he saw Eddie at this party, but no, it seems he wasn't there. However, then, at the end of the episode, the camera segment cuts in once more, revealing Eddie himself, talking to the camera about how he's back. Through this camera segment, the show set up a pattern, everyone talking about their regular lives, but then it breaks that pattern with Eddie. So much like how Eddie is going to suddenly return and turn Peter's life upside down, he also breaks the conventions established in the episode itself. It's a great way to give Eddie's return the weight it deserves, and to help sell him as a genuine threat to Peter's life. So that's what the rest of the arc is going to focus on. Venom versus Peter. And in my opinion, it's going to be much more interesting than their first bout last season. However, that's not all this episode had going for it. No, there's also this episodic plot involving Sandman. Unlike many of the other bad guys, Sandman has never had the loftiest aspirations. He seemingly just wants money and maybe a grain of clout. Here though, we get a deeper look into his character. We see his kindness, and most interestingly, his heroism when he saves people's lives after taking things too far. When I'd previously said I wanted more from some of the villains, this is exactly the sort of thing I was looking for. Beyond that, there's the sense that Peter has grown since his fight with Electro, with how he talks with Sandman about how he could do better. He's coming to understand more and more that these villains can change, and no doubt, that must make his upcoming struggle with Eddie even more difficult to handle. All in all, this episode is easily one of my favorites in the series so far. It expertly balances the episodic plot and the arc's larger story, crafting a narrative that's engaging both in terms of what it brings to the table for the whole series, and what it offers in and of itself. Then, in episode 19, the Venom plot continues. However, there's someone new in the mix. Kinda. See, John Jameson's exposure to the symbiote left him with some changes. Even though Kurt is trying to help him get back to normal, things aren't going so hot. John is understandably disappointed, but Peter tries to encourage him, saying that he could use his powers for good. Jonah agrees, and tells his son he could be a superhero. This episode's unique framing device comes in the form of quotes from the school's theater auditions, many of which can apply to both Venom and later, John. See, despite John wanting to help Spider-Man, they have a key difference of opinion. Since Venom has been causing trouble as a Spider-Man lookalike, John thinks Spider-Man should turn himself in to prove his innocence. Of course, that's a no-go for Spidey though, and now they're at an impasse. Right away, this sets John up as an interesting antagonist. John doesn't want to hurt Spider-Man, and he isn't trying to do a bad thing. He just wants to follow the proper rules and procedures. However, whatever's happened to his body soon has an effect on his mind. He becomes angry and irritable. So when Venom attacks pretending to be Spider-Man, well, that pushes him over the edge, and he becomes a destructive force. Once again, we have an episode that features a fantastic marriage between its episodic plot and the arc's larger plot. After all, Venom is still involved here. He simply isn't being too direct. Either way though, the show is selling his vengeance. He promised to ruin Peter's life, and so he begins by corrupting a potential hero who could have helped him and the rest of New York City. Additionally, I really like this fight between Spider-Man and John, and that's mainly due to the location. Immediately, it just looks interesting and unique, with all these dangling planets and big boy set pieces. But the really interesting part to me comes from its deeper meaning. As John smashes through this building, he's destroying the reputation he no doubt painstakingly built for himself as an astronaut, shown through the destruction of these planets. However, this episode manages to get even better because at the end, something happens. Venom swoops in and tells Jonah the truth. Peter Parker is Spider-Man. Considering Venom was in part mad because Peter took pictures too, well, this is just the perfect way for him to get revenge then. He's going to make Peter regret leveraging his superhero self for profit. And Venom's plan just gets more devious from here. He wants to expose Peter's identity and then give him the gene cleanser. That way, when angry villains come for revenge, he won't be able to protect himself. All in all, this adds up to make for a truly desperate conflict, where Peter is barely able to keep his secret identity in check. And even though he does succeed, there's this sense that some people haven't been completely convinced. I mean, George starts laying it on pretty thick that he knows the truth, just without quite saying it. So to me, the story is making it clear that we'll be coming back to this later, that we aren't yet finished with the ramifications of this plot. From here, the show continues to bring back ideas I thought it had dropped. Remember how Rhino wasn't supposed to be one bad guy? Like the transformation method was supposed to create an army of them? Well, it's coming back in the form of a villain auction and eventually battle. I love it. When a show remembers stuff I thought it had left behind, yeah. That's how a show really gets me invested and gets me trusting it going forward. However, that's not to say I'm a huge fan of everything in this arc. Honestly, I found it a bit boring. See, these episodes are about these gangs of villains bashing heads, but unfortunately, Spider-Man isn't all that involved in a lot of this stuff. That might not be a huge issue if there was another character I could latch onto and really understand, but to me there isn't. Instead, there are a bunch of pretty neat villains duking it out, which makes for fun action, and especially fun action during the opera episode, but not all that much investment on my part. I think this arc would have been better if Spider-Man was taking a more active role with the villains, instead of simply reacting to what's going on without getting many details. Meanwhile, Peter's relationship stuff is still ongoing. Of course, there's the typical series-long issues involving Spider-Man getting in the way of his relationships, along with the love triangle shenanigans. At this point though, I've gotta say, I'm getting kinda tired of it. It's just hard to get too invested in this Liz-Peter stuff when it's becoming increasingly obvious that he's gonna end up with Gwen anyway. Eventually, I just can't help but want the show to get to the point. All in all, this arc didn't do much for me. Again, it felt like the show was spinning its wheels a bit, or maybe focusing too much on setting up future plots instead of making them interesting to me here and now. But hey, I skipped over something fantastic, or rather, someone. And I've been skipping over him for a while now. Flash, the man. I love what they've been doing with his character. Last season, there were moments where it was clear Flash had more to him than it initially seemed, but this season takes his character so much further, transforming him into one of my favorite parts of the show. The big changes for him begin when Liz ends their relationship. Before, he thought he was the king. He could get whatever he wanted and act however he wanted without consequence. Now though, well, that's changing. At first, he tries to take solace in the fact that he can date any girl he wants to, but he soon realizes that isn't true when he sets his sights on Shashan, a theater girl who couldn't care less about his accomplishments in football or his big boy birthday bash. Then when he does audition for the school play to get close to her, it doesn't work out. Eventually, Flash even humbles himself by asking Peter for advice. It might seem like a small moment, but to me, this is Flash realizing and admitting that he isn't as great as he thought he was, that he isn't really better than Peter. That's a massive change for him, and the way it's paced, it happens naturally without a single hitch. Then Flash only gets better towards the end of the Venom arc, when he dresses up as Spider-Man in an effort to show everyone that they're being silly about Peter. Even if it comes from a place of inferiority and disbelief in our protagonist, what he does here is just heroic and cool. He puts himself in harm's way and helps Spider-Man. He does something dangerous to aid his hero. And that's really admirable, which is not an adjective I expected to relate to Flash, but here we are and I am here for it. And that's not the end of it, folks. Flash doesn't know how to stop getting better, because eventually Harry reveals to him that he was on the green and Flash is ticked. Now, my initial thought was kind of like, geez, man, stop worrying about your own reputation so much. This guy just shared something super personal with you. And yeah, this reaction probably still isn't the best, but it's a lot more justified when Flash goes and confesses to the teacher that one of their players was guzzling the green. Because now their championship title is under review, and his busted knee may have been for nothing. So he wasn't mad because he thought someone might find them out. He was mad because now their win was illegitimate. And even though it upset him, he did the right thing and admitted it. In the end, it's this side of Flash that gets Shashan to notice him. Not the accolades, not the approval of others. No, the fact that he does the right thing, even if it puts him in danger or makes others angry. There's a very real sense that when push comes to shove, Flash is a pretty good guy. All this is to say that Flash's slow change from typical bully to a shockingly well-rounded character is fantastic. You might even call it spectacular. And episode 24 continues to give minor characters their time to shine with its unique framing device. It begins with a fight between Spider-Man and Molten Man inside this burning building. MJ and Liz are there too, tucked beneath the bar. However, then we jump back to the past, seeing the events leading up to this confrontation from one of the characters' perspectives. Beyond simply working as a nice way to shake up the formula and give the episode a different identity from the rest, it once again gives the sense that these other characters are integral to the conflict. In other words, this isn't all about Peter. No, this is about a world full of characters who can each have an impact on what's going on, and as such, we're starting to see the world through their eyes. Out of all the secondary characters, Liz's brother Mark receives the most time. Here, we learn about the severity of his addiction and the desperate lengths he'll go to pay off his debts when he agrees to be a lab rat. In the end, the result is that the Green Goblin has control over his newfound flame powers and tells him he'll only turn them off if Mark defeats Spider-Man. Right off the bat, this is addressing some of the complaints I've had about villains before. I understand Mark, I get what's going on with him, and I get why he's doing what he's doing, no matter how flawed the logic is. And then, because of this development, we can also learn more about Peter. In fact, this episode has one of my favorite lines from him. Because after he learns about Mark's addiction, he wants to help, but Harry reminds him that Mark can only help himself. Peter, however, sees things a bit differently. Harry's right, he says. I can't help Mark, but maybe Spider-Man can. Here, the overconfidence Spider-Man gives Peter gets explored. The fact that he can take on incredible physical challenges is leading him to believe he can do other unrelated things, like fixing someone's addiction. Of course, there really isn't a reason why these physical accomplishments and something like that would be connected, but that's what makes it so interesting. Peter is getting used to succeeding as Spider-Man, so now he's starting to think that being Spider-Man simply means he'll succeed. It shows a fundamental and deep understanding of how continued risk-taking and victory can affect a person, and it makes Peter an even more engaging character. The next episode focuses on development for Black Cat and Peter in a similar manner. See, so far, Black Cat has been a somewhat aloof figure who appears at random intervals to help out or mess things up, depending on what she wants. But here she has a clear and more personal goal. She's breaking into this prison to get her father. However, due to the Green Goblin's meddling, her and Spider-Man get locked in with all these villains and need to get out safely. At first, there's the obvious problem between them, in that Spider-Man isn't going to let a criminal escape. But this quickly becomes more personal when he realizes that Black Cat's dad killed Uncle Ben. Here, we're taking an unexplored character and learning more about them, which in turn challenges Peter's worldview. After all, before, he could see Uncle Ben's murderer as whoever, really. He didn't know anything about them, and he didn't really need to. Now though, well, he's not a through and through bad guy. In fact, he has intense regret over what he did, and is willing to stay locked up if it means keeping these other supervillains in prison too. But at the same time, Spider-Man may have lost a potential ally in Black Cat, who blames him for her dad's decision. Really, part of what makes this so interesting is that it leads to natural questions for the future. What will Black Cat do? Will Peter end up thinking about her dad more? Will this, in some strange way, make it harder for him to deal with Uncle Ben's death? But those questions will have to wait, because we've got the main plot to deal with. Really, we've had it to deal with for a bit, because the Green Goblin has been back for a couple episodes, causing trouble. So, what's going on with him? Of course, this all ties back to Harry, who I've conveniently skimmed over for the most part in this video. But there's been a decent amount of Harry material. For one, he's joined the romantic rumble and asked Gwen to date, which she agrees to. But that isn't the end of potential conflicts between him and Peter. See, Norman has taken Peter on as an apprentice of sorts, which does more to cement Peter as the son Norman wished he'd always had. Considering Harry's troubled relationship with Norman, and how terrible Norman is to him, well, that could obviously cause some friction. Then, after he admits what's happened to Flash and the football team's championship title goes under review, he's tempted to return to the Do. And later, he misses the school play when the Green Goblin is out and about. So it seems that Harry is definitely up to no good. But then something strange happens. Harry calls both Gwen and Peter to his house and tells them what's happened. However, he reveals that he hasn't been taking the green again. Instead, it seems like someone else is the goblin now, and that he's one of their victims, which leads us to the season's big twist. Harry isn't Gobby. No, Norman is. The explanation? We only seemingly saw Norman and the Green Goblin in the same room before because the chameleon had happened to disguise himself as Norman at the same time. Later, Norman saw utility in this and hired the chameleon to continue this role. So a pretty nice coincidence there. Then there's the reason why Harry was in the Green Goblin costume last season. Well, he was blacking out from the green, and his dad happened to find him at home after running back from Spider-Man, so he grabbed his son, dressed him in this outfit, busted his leg, and went from there. Once again, a bit coincidental that his son happened to be right there at that time, blacked out, ready for the framing, but it still makes sense. At face value, this is a pretty neat twist, but I have some problems with it. First off, those coincidences I mentioned, they aren't a deal breaker, but I would have preferred if this had been more thoroughly planned by Norman, instead of there just being various moments where he got lucky. But my bigger problem comes from the way the Green Goblin has been handled himself. In particular, the way he was treated last episode. Because when no one else was listening, he was speaking in rhymes and even directly quoting the school play that Harry was missing from. Before I knew about this twist, I took this to be Harry's subconscious kind of taking over, which had previously been mentioned and explored. But now, why would Norman be doing this even when no one is listening? I guess he's just having fun? Maybe it's supposed to be that the green is affecting him mentally the way he said it was affecting Harry, but then he shouldn't be able to instantly turn off that personality as soon as the mask is removed. I know, I'm a party pooper. But my problem here is that my vision of Norman and my understanding of the Green Goblin don't line up at all, in part because of moments like this that, to me, feel like they only exist expressly to get us off the trail. As such, I didn't really buy into or enjoy this plot twist, though I can see why others would. However, this isn't all this episode has to offer. No, Spider-Man and Norman's fight seemingly leads to Norman's death, and then we're at the funeral, and Harry blames Spider-Man for his dad's death, and Harry heard Gwen and Peter talking earlier about being together, but now he manipulates Gwen into staying with him. And then we learn that Norman is actually alive, and oh boy, this is a rush flurry of stuff. To be honest, this happened so fast, I don't have a chance to emotionally connect with it. It all felt a bit unreal. But hey, maybe next episode will build on... Wait, what? Oh, no. Yeah, folks, this is the sad part, and the part you all probably knew was coming anyway. This show never got an ending. Instead, cancellation. So all the plot points I was excited to follow up on, the conflicts that engaged me because of their potential for the future, the fact that maybe they could have done something to retroactively help me appreciate this Green Goblin twist more, the ramifications of Sandman's change in character, Venom revealing Peter's identity, Tombstone being jailed, the relationship between Gwen and Peter. Nothing. We don't get that. Which makes the end of this video difficult. Because, in all honesty, I didn't enjoy this enough to call it great for myself, though I can definitely see why others would. Overall, I simply had too many problems, too many arcs or episodes that I found simply okay or even boring. It didn't have the consistency necessary for me to find it truly great. And that sucks, because one thing I was loving about this is that, as far as I'm concerned, it was getting better and better, more creative, more tightly written, more consistently engaging and interesting. It was on an upward trajectory and then just stopped, due to no real fault of its own. If it ever returns, maybe it'll reach greatness for me, but, well, I'm not counting on it returning. So yeah, that's the end. An anticlimactic end, but an end all the same. And I guess that's fitting for a show with a fate as unfortunate as this one. Hey there, thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, I encourage you to subscribe to the channel and ring the bell or check out some of my other videos. Have a good one. Hope to see you next time. Bye-bye for now.